Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we discuss how to overwinter plants. So let's go. It is a beautiful but rainy day here in New Hampshire. So I figured it'd be a great opportunity for us to talk about what to do with your tender plants during the winter months. So before we start talking about overwintering plants, I just want to go over a few things. In this pot here, this was off my bedroom balcony and it still does look quite beautiful. But our daytime temperatures are hovering between 50 to 60 Fahrenheit. Nighttime temperatures are hovering between 30 to 40 Fahrenheit. Within the next few weeks, we are going to get a frost and these plants will definitely be hit. So rather than be overwhelmed with too many plants to tackle at once, I figured let me just go ahead and start taking apart some of my window boxes. The plants in here are a flowering vinca, the pink colored ones. We have alyssum, and both of these plants were started from seed, and they were started from seeds that I collected, and then I grew the seeds indoors under my LED shop lights. Any related videos that I made regarding collecting the seeds of these plants or starting these plants indoors, I'll be sure to link down in the description below, as well as anything having to do with overwintering plants, because I have quite a few videos that go over all of that. And then also in these container pots are a trailing type of large leaf vinca. Now, this plant is hardy in many zones. Here in New Hampshire, zone 5B, it's marginally hardy. It might be hardy up on the south side of my house where it gets a lot of sun, and I'm going to experiment with that this year. But for today, what I'm planning to do with this particular plant is we'll be potting this up and I'll be keeping these plants in my garage. Over here are various pots as well as trays. There's a nursery close to my home where there's an area that you can drop off pots and containers and trays, and other people can pick them up. It's a great way to recycle. I love going there and being able to use these for my own yard, for my own backyard plant nursery. In this wheelbarrow, there is soil here. It's basically compost that I got from a local transfer station. I can get it for free. And even though it might have debris in there that I don't need, such as rocks or sticks, I just remove those, but free is free. So that's what I'm going to be using to pot up any plants that we're going to pot up today. When it comes to the alyssum, I've already collected a ton of the seeds. So for today, I'm just pulling these out and I'm going to be putting them in a bucket, and all the alyssum as well as the vinca will be added to my compost pile. So let's talk a little bit about why you would want to overwinter plants. One reason would be that you have a plant that you love and it's not hardy in your zone. Typically, that would be an annual, like an annual flower, but it could potentially be a perennial too that's marginally hardy, which means it won't survive in your area where you live. And when we talk about gardening zones, we are basically talking about plants that are hardy up to a certain temperature. So where I live in New Hampshire, my gardening zone, based on my zip code, is zone 5B. That means that plants can only survive down to a certain temperature. And I'm almost positive it's negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, any plant that might be labeled zone 6, let's say, it might survive, it might not survive. And the higher the zones go, so if a plant is hardy down to, let's say, zone 7, there's a chance, a very high chance, that that plant would not survive here where I live. So that might be a plant that I want to overwinter in my garage. There are a few examples of those that I know of for me. One would be Dusty Miller. I'm almost sure that Dusty Miller is hardy down to a zone 7. So that means it would not most likely survive here. Although I have had it survive because some of our winters have been hardy. Another example would be lemon coral sedum. Now, I've never had that plant, but I would love to have it. That is also listed as being hardy down to zone 7. It would be fine to experiment and try that plant in my garden, but I would also probably try to overwinter it somewhere where it's a little warmer, like in my garage, because I wouldn't want to lose it. Now let's talk about another reason why you would want to overwinter plants. We already talked about the fact that a certain plant, like an annual, might not be hardy in your area. Another reason why you might want to winter a plant is because You might be moving, let's say, and you want to bring some plants with you, but you aren't able to get them, onto your new property and plant them. So you need to overwinter them. That might be another reason. Or you receive some plants at the end of the season on sale from a family member or a friend, and the ground is frozen. And in regards to plants that are not hardy in your area, we talked about the annuals, but let's also talk about some bulbs that also would not be hardy in your area. Some examples for me where I live, and this might be different for you in your zone. Some examples for me would be like caladiums, canna lilies, tuberous begonias, dahlias, which we all love dahlias, gladiolas, peacock orchids, which are in the same family as gladiolas. And there's actually quite an extensive list of bulbs that bloom in the summertime that would not be hardy here where I live, that I will put up on the screen. So wherever you live and based on your gardening zone, you can find out also different bulbs that would not be hardy in your area. And the same would be true for annuals. But in this video, a lot of the tips and strategies that I'm going to share with you would still apply. It just might be different in terms of the plants that you're trying to overwinter. So there are different ways that you can overwinter plants. One way is you can bring a plant inside and treat it as a house plant. And with gardening, I always like to say never, but I usually don't like to overwinter plants as house plants. One of the reasons is I don't want to bring in any sort of insects or pests. But that's not a strong enough reason, because you can definitely take care of that pretty easily by cleaning off the roots of your plant, by cleaning off the leaves on your plant and treating them. And you just need to make sure that that plant is getting the right amount of light and the right amount of water. And that's going to vary from plant to plant. But when I'm talking about overwintering plants inside as a house plant, some great examples of plants that you might want to do that to would be a geranium, like the pelargonium. I know that people have done that with coleus. And what I'll do is put up on the screen other plants that are popular plants that are treated, that are usually annuals, but you can bring it in and overwinter it as a house plant. There are some plants that you can also overwinter bare root. And bare root means you're not bringing in any of the soil. You're just bringing the plant in, you're taking off all the soil, and you're bringing that plant in over winter. And one plant that I've had a lot of success with was geraniums, the pelargoniums. Now, pelargoniums are really, really easy to start from seed. A lot of people have had success with that. And I want to talk a little bit about why would you want to overwinter your pelargonium plant if you can easily start it from seed. One reason might be that not everyone has grow lights inside. So they don't have the option of starting geraniums from seed. So that would be one reason that you would want to overwinter your geranium plant that you love so much. Another reason would be that geranium plant might have come from a loved one, from a family member, and you want to keep that plant going. That would be another reason why you definitely want to just overwinter the plant, either as a house plant or bare root. And then also that geranium plant, each year that you overwinter that plant gets much bigger, much stronger. It just becomes a nice big plant. And every year, if you're going to start geraniums from seed, those plants will get to be a nice size, but they usually won't get to be that big, huge size that a geranium plant that you've overwintered for a number of years would be. But I have had a lot of luck overwintering my geranium plant bare root inside of either a paper bag or a cardboard box. And what I like about that method is I basically forget about it for a few months. And that's kind of nice because it's been a long summer and it's nice to have a little bit of a break before seed starting season begins. I really don't want to take care of many house plants. I just want to take a break from all plants. So I like that method of just storing my geraniums bare root. But again, you have to do what works for you with if you do have certain plants, and maybe you prefer to have them overwinter as a house plant, or maybe you want to also have a break and just take certain plants and either put them in your garage, put them in your basement, or put them bare root. Okay, now that I've emptied everything out of this window box, all that's left are these vinca plants. And I call this a vining vinca, but I also know there are other names to this vinca. Again, this vinca is different than the annual vinca that had the pink flowers. And this vinca is also different than, for me at least, the perennial vinca that I have out in my landscape. There's like vinca minor, vinca major, and I know that this plant is different. This has a variegated leaf, and this is hardy to zone 7. Normally here where I live, you would find this at the garden centers every spring because most people treat it as an annual. I bought this vinca plant about 3 years ago, and I just bought one plant for the simple reason that I wanted to propagate it and create more plants. I have so much of this plant now. So I'm going to be doing 2 things with this plant this year. One thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to be planting some of this on the south side of my house where there's some gravel, some rock, and I want to see if I can overwinter it outside. And then also I'm going to do what I did last year as well as the previous year, is I'm going to be putting this in my garage. My garage does not freeze. It gets to as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit on average. And if it does dip any below 40 degrees, it's not for very long. So most plants do very well out there. And the reason that it stays 40 degrees Fahrenheit is because out of the 4 walls, 2 of them are next to interior walls of my house. So I like to overwinter my plants towards the back of my garage next to an interior wall. And when it comes to these plants, I will be taking cuttings from them because they have so much growth on here. And I'm going to be rooting them in water, and I'll do that on a different day. I want to have as many of these plants as I can for 2 reasons. The biggest reason is for myself, so that I can put them in various pots and containers. But then also I want to be able to share them with other family members as well as friends. And I do have a backyard plant nursery, and if anyone's interested in some of these plants, I want to be able to offer them. So for right now, all I'm going to do is take them out of the soil. I'm going to divide them. I'm going to pot them up, and on a different day, I will propagate them from cuttings. So in this video, I know I'm jumping around a lot, but there's so much to talk about when it comes to overwintering plants. And I know I've made individual videos on like how to overwinter your tuberous begonias or how to overwinter your dahlias. And even though I like to overwinter my plants a certain way, that doesn't mean that's the only way. Always keep that in mind. There are different ways to overwinter plants. For dahlias, a lot of people can overwinter them right in the ground, meaning it's a perennial and they don't need to dig them up and store them. But if you live in a zone 7 or lower, like me, I'm a zone 5, I have to dig them up. Even if I was to try to protect them and put lots of layers of leaves and mulch, I feel pretty confident that the plant would not survive my winters. So rather than take that chance, I definitely choose to dig them up every year and store them. With my dahlia tubers, I wait until frost has hit them a few times. And after that, I dig them up, and I don't divide them in the fall, but some people do. I choose to divide them in the spring as soon as they start showing sprouts, as soon as the eyes start sprouting. And I choose to dig them up as a large, big tuber. But you can also divide your tubers down to individual pieces or as small as you want, and you can store them that way. I store my dahlia tubers in my garage. That it's a perfect temperature for those tubers. And that's really important. When you're overwintering a plant, it is so important to basically do your research and see what is the minimum temperature that that plant can have for overwintering and what's the maximum temperature. You don't want it to be too warm, because if it's too warm, the plant will never go dormant. And you don't want it to be too cold, because if it's too cold, the plant might die. So based on all of that, I know that my garage is the perfect place for me to overwinter my dahlia tubers. I wouldn't want to overwinter them out here in this shed because it definitely gets much colder than 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and those dahlia tubers would not survive out here. Okay, I changed my mind. I have some small little jars or pots here filled with water, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start cutting off some of this growth here. and I might as well get it rooting. Just going to take off some of the bottom leaves, and that is good to go. So when it comes to my dahlia tubers, I definitely want to be able to check on them as well as anything else that I'm overwintering about once a month. I want to make sure that things are not too dry, but it is so important to not let things be too wet either, because they are apt to rot. So that's something that you want to be mindful of if you're going to overwinter anything. Is the key is we're trying to keep these plants or these bulbs in a dormant state where they're basically sleeping, but we also don't want them to die. So with my dahlia tubers, when I'm checking on them, I'm just making sure that they're not too dry, that there isn't anything going on in terms of rot. And if they are dry, I just give them a small spritz of water on the very top. And then I close the box back up, and that's it for a month. And I usually put something on my calendar as a reminder to tell me to check on all my bulbs, all my dahlia tubers, all my plants, anything that I have overwintering in my garage. So I mentioned about adding a little bit of moisture to my dahlia tubers. There are other plants that I also will add some moisture to. And that would include any of these plants that are in pots with soil that I'm going to be also overwintering in my garage. Anything that's potted up that is not hardy in my zone, but I'm trying to overwinter it, I would also be checking those, but I don't want to give them too much water. I basically would take my finger, I would put it in about 1 inch deep in the soil. And if it still feels a little wet, I'm not going to give it any water. But if I put it in 1 inch in the soil and I feel that it seems very dry, then I would give it just a very, very small drink of water, and that's it. In regards to all these cuttings that I'm taking, they probably all won't take, but when it comes to taking any sort of cuttings, that's why I always like to take more than less, because there's a chance that you won't have all cuttings take, but you'll have some take, and that's all that matters. Some other bulbs that I've overwintered in my garage that don't require a lot of water, but I still check on them, are things like my tuberous begonias, my gladiolas, calla lilies, canna lilies. I do check on them just to make sure that there isn't any rot, because with any of these corms, tubers, bulbs, if you do notice rot, you immediately want to remove that. You don't want it to spread. And that's another reason why you're checking on your plants during the winter months, is not only to see if they're too dry or too wet, but also to see if there's any rot happening. Because if there is rot happening, you want to remove that bulb or that plant that has rot so that it doesn't spread. I am a big fan of overwintering plants because, let's face it, gardening is very expensive. And if you can overwinter a plant, especially a plant that's not hardy in your area, then you don't have to buy that plant again. You will have it for the next year. And not only will you have that original plant for the next year, but most of these plants that we've been talking about, they increase in stock over the years. For example, my dahlias, I have so many dahlias because every single year a dahlia plant produces so many tubers. And the same applies with any of the bulbs like the calla lilies or the canna lilies. And you'll end up with so many that you won't even know what to do with them. You'll have to give them to friends. But that's a good problem to have, I feel. But whenever I talk to people and they say, oh, every year, every single year, I buy this vinca plant. I'm like, why? So I think it's a great thing to get into this habit of trying to overwinter plants. Worst case, you try it and you don't succeed. And if that happens, try it again, but try a different method. And if you still aren't having success with it, well, at least you tried. That's the way I look at it anyway. I have all this good potting mix that has a lot of other good material in it, like perlite. I'm just mixing it in because if anything, now this is going to add very good drainage for the rest of my plants that I pot up. And that's important too. As you're overwintering plants, either indoors as house plants or in your garage or your basement, you want to make sure that that plant or those plants have very good drainage. You don't want the plants to be sitting in water. When it comes to the vinca and the vinca that I'm trying to root, I'm just going to put these in my garage, or they can even go out on my porch. They'll be fine. unless I know a frost is coming or a freeze is coming. But I'm just going to do that. And once they start creating roots, then I'll go ahead and I'll pot them up. You can overwinter a vegetable plant such as a pepper plant because it is considered a perennial in certain areas. And with a plant like that, what you would want to do is cut back as much of the top growth, all the leaves and everything. And there are so many different ways that have worked for people when it comes to overwintering pepper plants. So if it is something you want to try, you might want to research that a little bit. What I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be cutting back all the top growth, and I'm just going to keep it in my garage, and I'm going to see if it works. I don't add any supplemental light when it comes to any of these plants like these ones here. They are very dormant. They don't need a lot of light. But it might be that the pepper plant needs a little more light. To be honest with you, I'm not sure about that one. I don't have experience with that, but I wanted to mention it just because you might want to try it. You might want to research it a little more. But just know that there are a lot of videos out there in regards to overwintering pepper plants. So just make sure when you're doing your research, try to find videos where someone is showing you that it definitely worked a certain way for them. I've had a lot of luck overwintering Dusty Miller. Now, Dusty Miller is hardy down to zone 7. I have had it overwinter before, but what I've found is that it still takes a little bit of time for it to put on a good amount of growth when I have it overwinter out in the landscape. Whereas when I've overwintered it in my garage, by the time I'm ready to plant it out, which for me is usually the end of May based on my average last frost date, I have a nice sizable plant that I can plant out. So I'll be doing the same thing when it comes to my Dusty Miller. I'll be digging it up. I'll be potting it up just like this. I'm going to be cutting it back, but I'm going to try something different. And it sounds like a lot of people have tried it, which is taking cuttings off of the Dusty Miller to propagate the plant that way. So I might as well cut the plant back because you do want to do that with a lot of plants. If you're overwintering them, you want to cut them back. But I might as well take those cuttings and try to root them. And I won't be rooting them in water. I did a little research. It seems like with Dusty Miller, usually you're not successful with rooting it in water. You're more successful with rooting it in soil. So I will be doing that as well, just rooting it in soil. And I might do an experiment where I root it with rooting hormone and without rooting hormone to see which method works for me. One plant I want to talk about that a lot of people don't know that you can overwinter are mums. Now, I use the word overwinter, but I will say that mums, a lot of mums, are hardy in most zones, typically zone 5 and higher. And the key with the mums, with my experience, is that if you see the mums in the garden center during the late summer, that's the best time to pick up those mums and plant them out in your landscape. But it really depends on where you live. That's true, especially here in zone 5B, because mums are very expensive, and I personally don't want to buy them every single year. For me anyway, I feel like that's a waste of money. I think it's a shame to do that. So I prefer to treat my mums as perennials and have them come back every year. And I do have videos that talk about what I've done to get my mums to return each year, and I'll be sure to also put that down in the description below. So with this video, it was just meant to get you thinking about plants to try to overwinter. It's such a broad topic. There are so many plants you can overwinter. There are so many different ways you can overwinter those plants. But I wanted you to start thinking about it because now is the time to start thinking about that. And I want to inspire you to try it, to give it a try this year. And if you have success, I want to hear from you. I want to know how you did. But it's definitely fun. And if you do try overwintering your plants indoors and for whatever reason it becomes an issue with the plants, let's say you get an infestation of some sort of bug, don't let that bring you down. You can still take that plant and still attempt to overwinter it. Let's say in a garage or in a basement. You might just need to treat it. And even if I don't have a lot of videos that go over that whole process, I know there's a lot of information out there that is out there for you to look up and research. I wanted to thank all of you for watching this video, for watching a lot of my videos and supporting my channel. It truly does mean a lot to me. I love hearing from you. If you have any questions at all, please drop them down in the comment section below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.